Hello, everyone. This is Constance from Mysterious Galaxy. Tonight we have a great event that celebrates the power that women can find in other female friendships, and it also talks about the importance of standing up when you are violated. I think having these kinds of photos leaked of yourself are violated. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself though, but we are celebrating the book Revenge of the Sluts. A virtual round of applause, and author Natalie Walton is in the house with us, and she's going to be in conversation with Jananie. And before I pass it over to them, some quick little... Oh, hello everyone. Hi Tiffany. Hi Crystal. So as you guys can see, the chat section is going to be to the right-hand side. If you have any questions, make sure that you ask down below right where it says ask a question. That is indeed where you may ask a question. Make sure you take advantage of that, because that's the really fun part about events, is that the authors are at your mercy. And then if you would like to also buy the book, there will be a buy book button down below. And that is pretty much it. This is an awesome book where, just to elaborate a little bit more on it, there are these girls and they have nudes that are leaked, and it's kind of the reaction in the story that happens after that. And as I said, I love books that celebrate female friendships and the strength of women coming together, especially when they have been wronged, which this most assuredly is something that shouldn't be done to someone. And also social media, especially after last year with us all on their phones, it's fascinating, I think, to discuss rights and social media, and just there's so many amazingly awesome things that are in this book. So I will stop rambling about it and pass it on to Jananie. And don't forget, I will see you guys at the end of the event, and make sure to ask your questions down below.
Thank you so much. Okay, so I guess we'll get started. Just to start, I'm Jananie. For those of you who don't know, I work at Wattpad, and I had the amazing pleasure of working on Natalie's book in terms of the marketing and the social media, and it was just so much fun because I love this book so much, and I just love the message that it brings across. So I'm so excited to be talking with you today, Natalie. But I guess for those of you who don't know too much about Natalie, I will tell you a little bit about her to start. So Natalie has been writing as long as she can remember, completing her first book in second grade. She began posting her stories on Wattpad at the age of 14 and has since amassed over 18 million reads on her works on Wattpad. Natalie is a Delaware resident and wrote Revenge of the Sluts while being a full-time student at the University of Delaware, working toward her degree in sociology and criminal justice, which is just amazing to me because just the thought of writing a whole entire book while you're in university is crazy. So you are amazing. I respect the hustle. But I would love for you to kind of talk about or introduce yourself a little bit and tell us a little bit about the book, Revenge of the Slut.
Yeah, I'm super excited to be here. Thanks for having me, and thanks for tuning in. I don't know if there's anybody from the East Coast, but it's really late. So for anyone who made it, I really appreciate it. But yeah, I wrote Revenge of the Sluts when I was in college. I had the idea starting when I was at 12 or 13, so it started pretty young. And I just really wanted to write a book about female empowerment. I also wanted to write about journalism. I wanted to write a little bit of a mystery. So it was kind of a culmination of all those things. It was 3 separate ideas, and I was like, I want to write a book about this. So Revenge of the Sluts was born.
Very nice. And can you tell us a little bit about what the book's about for anyone who hasn't picked it up yet, that kind of thing, and what kind of reader it would appeal to?
Yeah, so it's a YA novel. It's recommended, I think, for ages maybe 13 to 17, I want to say. As was introduced a little bit earlier, it's about some girls who are in high school. Their intimate photographs are leaked via an email from an anonymous sender. And then the whole book is basically just kind of figuring out who sent the email, just kind of banding together and kind of fighting back against the school. And it's a very I pride myself on it being kind of a fight the system book. It's definitely kind of a early stage, it's okay to say you're upset with how things are going around you, that kind of idea.
Yeah, and I love that aspect of the book. For those of you guys who don't know, the main character of the book, Eden, and her newspaper friends at the school are trying to fight the system, and also with the other girls who whose photos were linked. They're trying to fight against a school who doesn't really care what happened to them, and against like the double standards that are going on in the book. And I just love so many aspects of this book. But I would love to hear like what kind of initially inspired you to write this book. Like what made you want to write about 7 girls whose nudes were getting leaked? Like what brought that on?
Yeah, it was kind of a long-winded process because it started off originally where I was like, oh, I'm going to write a book about, just kind of like female empowerment and like what it means to like be called a slut and to identify as one, that kind of idea. But I came up with the idea like I was like 12 or 13 and I was like, yeah, I can totally write this. Like this will be great. I have such a nuanced understanding of the issue, that kind of idea.
Yeah.
So I kind of put it on the back burner because I was like, I think this might be too much for me. So I picked it up later thinking, oh, nothing's really going to come of this idea, but it was like always kind of in the back of my mind as a possibility. And then it was not until I was in college, I was actually working an internship with a like child advocacy organization. And I was kind of like working on these projects and like, it'd be really interesting to write a book kind of not necessarily inspired, like there's not like one particular case or incident where the book is based on, but it was just kind of like reading all of these like stories of, sexual violence in K through 12 incidences, that kind of idea and environment. And just kind of wanting to, I guess, explore that a little bit. And then all the other elements kind of came together. It was a really, like, people have asked me where the idea came from. And I'm like, I don't know. Like, there was just kind of a moment. And I remember texting one of my friends and being like, I think I have something. Like, I wrote, like, a couple chapters of this idea. And I haven't plotted anything out formally. But, like, I think I have something. It was very, like once it clicked, it really kind of clicked for me.
Yeah, that's super cool and interesting to hear that, because like you would think it would come out of like a very specific experience, but I guess like as women and as girls, like we are so subliminally like exposed to these kinds of things that it's actually quite a natural story that would come to us very unfortunately. So yeah, it's just very interesting to me, like the origin story. I would love to hear though, like how did you get started on Wattpad and how the whole process, or writing journey started there and how it moved towards getting published?
Yeah, I started writing really young, and then I was like, I want to share it with people, but I think around like 2nd or 3rd grade, I started to get really like shy about it, and I was like, I don't want anybody like, I don't want anybody reading it. I don't want anybody to know what I'm talking. Like everyone would know that I was writing something, so I'd write in like my little notebooks and things like that, and like handwrite back in like 3rd and 4th grade. But, and then I just eventually was like, oh, it'd be fun to like type these and maybe share it with people. So I did some research and I ended up on like the Goodreads like story forums for a while. That was like a little, and then it was like all these people.
I didn't know that existed. Okay.
Yeah, it's like this like super obscure side of the internet. And then I was like, oh, there's like a bigger website that like the whole goal of the website is to like share writing with other people. Let's like try that out. So that's what ended up happening. And then I wrote, kind of on and off throughout, I guess, like middle school and high school. And it eventually turned into the publishing, which is really exciting.
Yeah, so. That is super cool. And like, well, I know the backstory, but, everyone here doesn't really. So how did the book go from being on Wattpad, that kind of like first draft, to where it is now, like a physical book that I'm holding in my hand? Like, this is so cool. And it's gorgeous, by the way, if anyone wanted to hit that buy button below. Shameless plug.
But yeah, I started writing it originally and just kind of like posting it online. I was like, yeah, this will be, super fun, super, like, I'm excited about this idea. I have no idea what's actually going to come of it. Like, it wasn't something where I went into it and was like, oh, this is going to be like it for me. Like, I had a little bit of a feeling, like, I think as authors, we know when we write something that like, I don't know, like fits us. Like it's just kind of like this book felt like so many different parts of me where I was like, I know I'm going to fight for it to get published eventually. I just didn't know like when it was going to happen or like who was going to happen with or like any of the actual like logistics. I was just like, I think this could,
like,
I can fight for this one. Yeah. And then I let me think. I reached a point when I was like, oh, maybe I should like take this seriously. It won a Waddy Award, which is super exciting. And then I reached out to a couple of friends who actually are not like really like writer friends, which I really appreciate. They like took the time to actually like read my book and were, like my beta readers.
Amazing.
Just like in the middle of the school year, they were like, yeah, sure, of course I'll like review it and check it out and stuff like that. And then I think after going through like a little bit of just kind of fixing it up, Wattpad eventually reached out. I'm like trying to remember the exact timeline on it, but they reached out and were kind of just like, we're interested in this manuscript. What's the deal? What do you want to do with it? That kind of idea. And then from there, I ended up getting the offer for the book, which was really, so it was a long process. Like it was definitely like, you know, it wasn't just I wrote something, it was like, yeah, this is it. Like, this is going to be perfect. Someone's going to want to publish this. Like there was a little bit of self-awareness of like,
okay. And so like, I guess like you knew there was like a bit of self-awareness. So then how did it feel going through the editorial process and like getting it to the place where like, you know, you're like, okay, this is like perfect. Like I'm ready. This is out, ready to be on the shelves.
So I actually really love editing. Like that's like one of my, I love being able to like tear. I think part of it was because for Revenge of the Sluts, I had like all of these different things that I wanted to do. And it was just a matter of figuring out like what was the most important piece. Like realistically, I could have probably written like the equivalent of like a director's cut of the book. Like I could have added like an additional like 200 pages.
I think I'd read it. So.
So it's basically just like really long discussions with my editor, Deanna, and kind of back and forth for me, just figuring out, you know, like what pieces are the most important, what's going to hit like the core of the story, that kind of idea. Yeah, I think that's, I like lost track of the question in the middle of that one.
No, that's okay. Yeah. And so like, do you feel like the book changed a lot from the first draft that you had? To like the final version that we have now?
Yeah, I would say so. I think I became more comfortable with the actual like commentary aspects of it. Like I think the original draft of it was a little bit like soapier, a little bit more like teen drama. It definitely had a little bit more of like, I guess like an edge to it. And like I felt comfortable with it, but if there's anything that like I figured out about my writing, it's that I tend to be pretty like understated. Like my approach to writing is like almost like too realistic in that sense, where these are things where you could actually, so it ended up turning into situations of like, you know, what would actually happen in this scenario. Like in this case, it might not be the most exciting outcome, but it's something that somebody could see themselves actually in and kind of understand and empathize and that kind of idea.
Oh, nice. Okay. That's so interesting. And I one of the things that I actually loved about the book was how realistic it was. Like I felt like it hit on a lot of honest aspects of being a teen and, you know, being someone like in that young age where like you're dating or you are attracted to people or, you know, things are going on. And the fact that you have like a phone, you have this digital space, and that so much of our lives are just contained within those digital spaces, like it just changes the whole landscape of how we think of things. And I thought that it handled all of that super, super well.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Yay, I'm glad. I guess one of my questions is like, did you feel like it was really challenging to write on this subject? And like, what parts of the book like felt the most challenging to write? Like what aspects of it?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I feel like the like social commentary kind of like ripped from the headlines kind of things were like the easiest part for me. Like my background is sociology and social science and kind of like sexual violence research specifically. So something like Revenge of the Sluts was basically just like an extension of that. So it felt very natural for me to do a lot of the more like, okay, how can I suggest this like theory that I have in the back of my mind or like this trend that I know, you know, that kind of idea.
Yeah.
And it's like
kind of like writing an essay. Yeah.
It was like those were the parts that like made sense to me where I was like, yeah, okay, if I do this, it'll kind of reflect this part or, you know, this response that I read in this one article, that kind of idea. So I actually found kind of like, I guess creating the story itself. So kind of like how to drive the momentum of it and things like that. Like the actual storytelling elements, I think were like something I really had to kind of like learn and work on. And, you know, Deanna would email me and she'd be like, okay, so we actually need more. Like we need some like additional spice. We need to like, you know, make this feel less like we're reading like a research paper, you know, that kind of idea, which was really, you know, like grounding and really helpful for me. Because it's definitely like, I don't like, I take a lot of pride in being able to like write something where it's, I mean, I essentially lived through this. Like I graduated from high school, you know, like 8 years ago or whatever it was. But it still feels very like real to me. Like when I was going through middle school and high school, everyone had phones, everyone had, you know, social media. We were at the very beginning of like, you know, Instagram and stuff like that. So it's still very like easy for me to visualize and relate to that kind of idea.
For sure. And I have seen that with like other YA authors, like who, you know, were in that teen space before having phones. And it's just like a totally different experience that they had versus like, you know, someone today is having, and just the different types of social media that kind of arise. But yeah, that totally makes sense. And what you said about Deanna was hilarious because that is something that I've heard her say, like, that is sometimes it needs a bit more spice.
I remember I was like, I'm so sorry. like I'll work on it, I promise.
It's hilarious. But I would love to know, I guess, in terms of like the story aspects, what were some of your favorite scenes to write, and who were your favorite characters to write?
Yeah, so I really loved basically any scene. This is going to be super obvious, but I loved any scene where all of the girls actually got to like be together, because the whole point of the book is it's very high school in the sense that like everyone kind of revolves around each other and like everyone's in the same circles and kind of overlaps, but like not everyone's going to be friends. Like not everyone's gonna like hang out or necessarily associate, even when something like, you know, Nudegate happens or there's something that kind of brings people together. They're not necessarily all gonna suddenly start like bonding and spending a lot of time. So I think it was really nice when there were instances where it naturally, they all could be in the same space. And it also helps that those were moments when it was like, you know, kind of like a consciousness awareness, kind of like everyone getting together and talking about what they've gone through, their experiences, or kind of like figuring out how to protest, that kind of idea. So it's like different. Yeah, it was definitely, I think those elements were the most fun. They were definitely like, I think difficult because it was kind of figuring out how to write about it, how to kind of just like build on each character, that the kind of idea. So I want to make it as honest as possible. So it was definitely, that was one of those where I took a lot of time trying to write it, and there's a lot of general care that went into it. So
yeah. And did you have a like favorite character that you liked to write?
Yeah, I think this was really, I really loved writing Sloane. Like, I think she really stands out to me as just one of those, like,
character.
She like embodies the whole message of the book, and that idea of like it's, we don't have to take this sitting down, like we will find ways of kind of going against the people who've hurt us, that kind of idea. And I think what I like about the book is it's definitely ways that like I could see people doing. Like it's, you know, things like talking to the school, and then when that doesn't work, finding ways to talk about the school in a public setting, that kind of idea. So it's all very like practical and very grounded. And I don't know, I just really liked whenever she would come up. It was one of those, like, she's like like definitely like a scene stealer, I think, in a lot of ways.
She was. She really, really was. Yeah. I absolutely loved Sloane, and I love how she was both very, very strong, but also very vulnerable throughout the book. And what you said about, you know, the practical ways that like the kids were kind of dealing with this issue, like I felt that was very, very true. And I think like any teen kind of reading this will understand, like, not that like you can't take these steps and they won't always work, but you know, these are the devices that you can take hold of. And I was curious actually, when I was, I'm just trying to think right now. I wanted to know with, my brain is not working right now. Oh, okay, I got it now. Yes, because it was a very specific thing. So you were talking about how the girls coming together, and one of my favorite scenes was when they show up in a interesting piece of attire, and one piece of that attire is a scarlet A, which we know like refers to the Scarlet Letter and all that. But I wanted to know if it kind of referred to a specific movie, the Easy A, and what kind of inspirations you drew from there. Because I feel like there's a lot of parallels. Yeah.
It was definitely, honestly, I would say it was more Easy A, which is really funny because I think Easy A is very much of our generation, as opposed to something like Scarlet Letter is. Like, I didn't really like the Scarlet Letter. I'm going to be totally honest.
Neither
like,
did
not
I. I had to read it for an American Lit class when it was my favorite thing.
So I definitely, it was more of kind of an homage to like, I guess Easy A and kind of this feeling of like for me, Easy A marked this beginning of like, oh, like there's like names for the things that I'm seeing, and like we can actually like talk about this. And like I don't know if this was like a common occurrence or if this was I just had a big moment when I was like 12 years old and was like I get it now, like but yeah, no, that was definitely, it was kind of just a way of kind of, I guess, like nodding to both the movie and the book and kind of the messages behind those and how much they mean to me in terms of learning about, myself and learning about what it means to kind of own up to the titles that, you're given and being like, yeah, so what? Like that kind of idea.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. Yeah. And I felt like both your book and Easy A have that like energy, and it just made me really happy. And yeah, I just loved it. So I guess like on that note, in terms of like inspiration, I would love to hear like who are your favorite writers or kind of places that you've drawn inspiration, whether that's like fiction, nonfiction, or like, media.
Yeah, absolutely. This is not going to come as any kind of like a surprise, but my favorite authors tend to have kind of that theme of like strong or at the very least like interesting female characters. So like I love Gillian Flynn. Like I love her. She only has like her 3 books. So, like I love her writing and I love the way that she handles female characters. Like that was like, I think I'm trying to think when I read her books. I had like one summer. It was like 1 week where I just read them all back to back. It was like, I don't know, maybe like 16 or 17 or something like that. And it was just like the way that she writes about women is so just like, she's not afraid to like go there, and I just really appreciate that. And I think, and it's like, I'm not going to say that my book like took anything from, you know what I mean? Like we definitely write in very different genres and we have very different approaches to things, and it's definitely not something where I'm going to be like, yeah, these are like comp titles. Like if you like Gillian Flynn, you'll like that kind of idea. But it's more of like, I think there's small influences that you can see in kind of the way that I'm not afraid to be like, women can be bad. Like it's, women, this is the thing we have to talk about and we have to address it. And there's nothing wrong with kind of having these open conversations. But then it's, I also read like a ton of Karen Slaughter books. It's very like crime heavy. I read a lot of like Tess Gerritsen, who wrote the Rosalind Isles series, Riley Sager, that kind of idea. So definitely like a little bit darker and a little bit like warrior than like what I typically. But it's one of those where it's like, maybe one day I'll get there. For now, I'll keep writing my like cozy, like kind of like high school based mysteries. But who knows? Maybe one day we'll see.
Yeah, no, but I could like totally see that from your writing, because like the book itself, although it's like dealing with so many like heavy topics and like things that we should be talking about more, it is very much structured like a mystery, and the entire time you want to know who released the photos, and like you are drawn towards the end by that common thread of just wanting to know what happens. And so it very much feels like a mystery in that way, and that was one of the reasons why I loved it, because it's just so much fun to keep going and find out what's going to happen next, and also just all the obstacles that the characters face throughout. But one actually thing that just came to my mind right now was the book has a lot of elements of like the newspaper, the school newspaper, and Eden being a school reporter. And so I want to know, like, was that influenced in any part by like your real life? I feel like I saw you on social media mention something about.
I was like very, very briefly a college reporter and editor. So when I was, we didn't have a school newspaper when I was in high school. I had to do this like external program, and it was like a 1 weekend. So I got like 3 days of the year where I got to be a journalist when I was in high school. So by the time I got to college, I was like, all right, let's go. Like we need to, like I want to write some articles. I want to be busy. So it's, I think Eden in a lot of ways, like I think there are people who will find kind of her like her drive and her desire to like have a successful newspaper and like meet that big story like unrealistic. Like I think it's going to be something where that might not ring true to people because it's like such a strange kind of hobby to like put everything into.
Yeah, it's a very strong passion.
Yeah, but it's definitely something where like I wanted that when I was younger. Like I wanted to read YA that was like, you know, kind of like Nancy Drew style or like Veronica Mars or like something where, and I wanted somebody who is basically solving mysteries, but in the sense of like, I don't know, like newspapers basically. And there wasn't that much out there. So that was kind of my, you know, contribution, I guess, to the like YA journalism canon. Like I was like, all right,
I love that though. I love that
anyway.
And I love that like it also centers like Eden as this very strong like female main character who is not really actually focused on any type of romance in any way, but she's really focused on like her career as like this school reporter and like just the newspaper and that aspect and getting to the truth of things, which I really admire because a lot of times in YA, you know, we get a lot of romance focused books, regardless of the genre. So that was like something really refreshing because she was just she was just so focused on finding out the truth. Like that was her main objective, which I really enjoyed. I did want to ask though, you probably relate to Eden a lot, but do you feel like there's a specific character that you related to the most or who has aspects that are similar to you?
That's actually a really interesting question. I feel like there's a lot of kind of like small bits of me in every character. Like it's kind of, I think Eden is the most like kind of representative of who I am and kind of like, I don't know, just the way, because I think in a lot of ways she embodies kind of that like, you know, like she's seeing everything. Like she kind of just has to, like, she's watching everything unfold and she's like, you know, essentially a bystander in all of this. And it's kind of just like her figuring out like what that means and like what high school, like, you know, what's the deal with high school and that kind of idea. So I think in a lot of ways we like think the same, which makes sense because like I wrote her like but yeah, I mean I think like for Sloane, I think she really embodies that idea of like it's just kind of like general like leadership, like that desire to kind of like do something, but also feeling kind of like, you know, maybe I'm not ready for this. Do I really want to do this? Do I actually want to like take that step of being the person who's like kind of in front of the room talking about this issue, you know, that kind of idea. Yeah, I mean, even like Atticus in a lot of ways, like he's a pretty, you know, minor character and everything, and the cast is huge. So it's kind of like everyone's a little bit of like their own island. I feel like it's a really interesting kind of, I like it. I like having big casts and lots of people.
I love it.
It's very high school to me to have a lot of people kind of all like fit together and weird.
Oh yeah.
But
that's definitely how like high school feels, right?
Yeah, definitely. It's just kind of like you kind of all know each other and you're all in the same circles and like there might be kind of like friendships that connect you, but you're not necessarily going to be like super close with certain people or even like see them in your classes, that kind of idea. But yeah, I think, you know, there's like little bits and pieces everywhere. I mean, even, you know, and somebody like Ronnie who feels so strongly about like the newspaper and like just getting it out there. And I think there's a lot of similarities between her and Eden's passion of just like, we have to tell the story, like we have to do what we can, and this is how we're going to contribute to the cause, basically.
Yeah, that's well said. And I totally feel that. And I guess I wanted to ask, because we touched a little bit about this with like the discussion of like genre and stuff, but do you feel like, how do you feel like your book fits in YA and like in that kind of category? And do you feel like there are other things that you wish you could see more in YA for teens to be like reading, like not necessarily just in your book, but that you would love to see in others as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's like bits and pieces where it feels very high school. Like, I think there's a lot of it where it feels like traditional YA structure. I mean, it's, some of the decision making isn't like, fully like it's definitely like
Yeah.
distinctively YA and distinctively very like teenager in that way. But I do think, like the elements of like the heavy focus on journalism for one thing, I think is something that we don't really see in YA that frequently. Like, it's something where I've intentionally looked for it because that's something that's really interesting to me. Like, I know for some people it's like, oh my God, why would I want to read about a school newspaper? But it's like one of those things where I'm like, I want to like give people somebody to look up to. Like, there's people, like myself, where when I was going through high school, there wasn't much out there about like, yeah, you can be like a young journalist. Like, let's go. Like, let's just like, like you can write stories and articles, and this is like a way of like reaching people and like. I feel like it's a really interesting way of like informing people and starting a conversation. It's the same thing with books. It's, writing as a means of communicating a thought, I guess.
No, I love that.
Like, let me think.
I love it also because like, I feel like with younger generations, like we don't pick up newspapers anymore.
Yeah.
Like, we don't interact with media and like journalism as strongly as like older generations. And so, most of our information comes from like social media. So I love that like you're so passionate about the journalism aspect, because I think it's something that I would love for more people my age and younger, like to continue being interested in, and like remembering that like, social media is not the one true source of information. Like, there are other more proper places you should be getting your information, and fruitful places to have discussions. So,
yeah, I mean, my dad like works for a newspaper, so it's one of those where we'd get it delivered. So for me, I was like, the physical newspaper is always around in my house, and I was like,
yeah, I love that.
This is like totally normal. Like, everyone just like like buys their newspaper, and I was like, no, this is like super old. Like, this is like like nobody does this anymore, and this is like wildly outdated. But yeah, I think it definitely ingrained kind of this idea of like, there's something really nice about being able to read kind of from a page and just having a physical paper and something. And I mean, it was the first time I got to see my name like in print, that kind of idea. So it's kind of like I don't know, I've always felt very passionately about newspapers and young people in journalism and things like that in particular.
For sure. Yeah, I love that. I love all of it. So we are at like the half-hour mark. So I think I'm going to start checking the questions from everyone here. And I will read them out to you and we can answer. So first question is, how did your studies and thesis on sexual harassment mythology influence your writing and the story?
Ooh, that's a really interesting one. I think hopefully at least, I think it made kind of my understanding of kind of sexual violence in the context it happens in a little bit stronger. Like, I think when I first started drafting the book, I was still a sophomore, so I wasn't working on my thesis yet. But at that time, I had a little bit of a background, and I was sort of involved in sociology. I'd taken like my basic level classes, that kind of idea. But I think as I was writing alongside taking my classes, I mean, I took a class on like, American sexualities throughout history. I took a class on like sex crimes and punishment, stuff like that. So it was like taking these classes that were very specific to kind of what I wanted to talk about. And I think that definitely drove the story in certain ways and what I wanted to feature and kind of how I wanted to talk about things, that kind of idea. I hope that answered it.
Actually, I have a follow-up question. What was your favorite like course that you took? Because some of them seem really interesting.
I was a huge fan of criminology, just like a core like criminology class. Yeah, I genuinely loved taking my sex crimes and punishment class. Like the professor for that class ended up being my thesis advisor. Like,
nice.
I learned, it felt very like it's for sociology for me, like feels like how my brain works, if that makes sense. Like, it was one of those majors where it was like I took my intro class and I was like, this is it. Like, this is the subject I've been waiting for. Like, so it's, yeah, I think anything pretty much in that family was really like influential, and I also just genuinely like enjoyed it. Like, I thought the work was like not, I don't want to say fun, so that's gonna sound terrible.
No, but it
like
yeah.
fun for me. It was like a good.
Mhm. Love it. Yeah, it brought value to your life, I feel. Okay. The next question is, what is a message that you hope readers can take away from this book? Because there's
Yeah.
a lot.
Yeah, I think kind of the core one is that we need to talk about teenagers about things, even if we're uncomfortable about it. I think issues like having more comprehensive sex eds, being able to have those tricky conversations about, you know, things like masturbation or sexting or like what sex actually is and what it means for relationships. I think those are just so important and so key. And I think those conversations were missing for a lot of my peers growing up. And like we'd end up in, you know, situations where it's like, yeah, there were cases of revenge porn in my middle school and high school, and they just kind of got brushed off. And it's like, well, nobody ever told us what to do. It's like asking a bunch of like, you know, 13-year-olds to figure out how to like respond to this major violation. It's so I definitely think that's like the number one, where it's like, if anyone can take anything away, it's the value of like just talking, like just like having honest conversations about what this all means.
For sure. And like not only for like a teen reading this, but like adults reading this too. I just feel like, you know, we assume that leaving children in innocence and not telling them things, it protects them in some way, but by leaving them in ignorance, we are, you know, harming them later when they are not equipped to deal with these situations, which is like sometimes what happens. And it's just the transparency is what we need, and the shamelessness to all of this. Okay, next question. From Caitlin. Do you have a dream casting? Okay. Do you have a dream casting should Revenge of the Sluts ever go to screen?
Okay, so for most of the characters, I didn't. Like, it was kind of just like they existed in my head. Like, I had a general kind of almost like the equivalent of like an illustration of them, kind of like a very loose, like I could visualize just general characteristics. But for Atticus specifically, I took a whole bunch of inspiration from the actor Nick Robinson. That was like my one thing where I was like, I don't know how I want to write him. Like, he's kind of like, in the earlier drafts, he was definitely more of like a true background character. Like, he would kind of just like show up. And I was like, I don't know what to do with him. Like, should I just cut him out entirely? And I was like trying to figure out how to put pieces together. And I was like, oh, wasn't there an actor in this one thing? And I was like, wait, let me find him on like, and I don't know. He just seems like someone who's just a really like, I don't know. So he's like the one person where for some reason I was like, yeah, like I can visualize him like in the context of the book. Everyone else, it was like a kind of a foggy picture.
No, that makes sense. And actually, Tiffany in the chat here put a heart for Nick Robinson and says he's such a cinnamon roll.
I agree. He just seems like really nice. Like, he just seems like someone you'd want to hang out with. And I was like, all right, this
makes sense for Atticus. Yeah,
it was like just super mellow, like someone who would go to bat for you, but wouldn't necessarily like make himself super present in the room. Like,
very humble. Yeah,
this is who I want it to be.
Yeah, Atticus is great, guys. Go read the book because I mean, all the girls are fantastic too, but he's like the sideshow, and he's great too. Okay, the next question is, why do you think that conversations normally focus on how men treat women, but then how women treat and judge other women is frequently overlooked?
Oh, really? All right. Coming out swinging. Wow. Okay. I think in some ways we're kind of taught not to talk about women negatively. Like, I think it's this weird kind of like, you know, we're taught to like gossip, and we're taught to be jealous, and we're taught to kind of like do all of these things, and like women are competition, but they're also like supposed to be our best friends and like our, you know, sources of like affection and care and things like that. And I think it's just a really kind of complicated conversation. I think it can come across as kind of like, oh, so you hate women if you're like trying to kind of say, well, you know, maybe we need to talk a little bit about like, you know, jealousy and what that actually means, or like the mean girl trope, that kind of idea. It definitely kind of veers into, oh, well, you know, that's anti-feminist. And it's like, well, it's a little bit more nuanced than that, I think, in a lot of ways, but that nuance can be really hard to, I think, capture. So it's easier to just kind of be like, you know, like don't do it, rather than trying to figure out like the roots of why people might be jealous or angry or kind of like petty toward each other. I hope that helps. I can like, I don't know. We can talk about that further if anybody wants to, but
yeah. And I think another aspect was like, why do you think like they focus on how men treat women, rather? Oh yeah, and then how women like treat each other and judge each other is often overlooked. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think we're we're still trying to figure it out. I mean, like, I don't think I have all the answers on it, and like
Yeah, for
fully
sure.
understanding like the social context of like why exactly we do what we do. I mean, I think it's just kind of this logical step of like it's primarily men who are hurting women, so like obviously we should focus on the people who are doing the active harm. But I think that just it's one of those things where then the parts that get overlooked are kind of the like smaller everyday kind of injustices, you know, the idea of like girls who call each other sluts, that kind of idea. Then it turns to a conversation of like, well, let's focus on the people who are like actively hurting the women. And it's like, well, we need all pieces, I think, for it to actually get somewhere.
For sure. Yeah. And it's hard. There's so many aspects to it. And like, yeah, as you were saying, like the actual harm, like focused harm that we are seeing is straight in front of our eyes. And then it's more of like the small things and the way our attitudes towards things that we don't really notice as much. And we also need to have a conversation about, which makes sense. Okay, let's see. Okay, this is an interesting question. Do you think that smartphones and social media has created new forms of sexual harassment that older generations are unaware of?
Unaware of? Sorry, was that the...
Just unaware. So do you think that smartphones and social media have created new forms of sexual harassment that older generations are unaware of?
I mean, it's a little bit tricky because I feel like I'm in that like in between of like things have evolved since I was in high school, and since, you know, like Snapchat was like just coming out, I think as I was maybe like 16 or 17. So I haven't spent like nearly as long on some of these like platforms as some other people have, or like grown up on them as much as like my brother's 14. So it's kind of like for him, his experience with things like Snapchat and things like that are totally different from mine. But yeah, I think in a general sense, there's probably a lot. Like I know when I was in middle school and high school, there were things that people didn't know about, and there were things that adults like maybe would hear whispers of, but they were like, no, like that's not actually happening. Like that's not a real thing that goes on. And it's like, no, it's way more common, I think, than anybody feels comfortable about. Like it's definitely something where it's easier to just kind of be like, nope, like that's just not happening, doesn't exist, that kind of idea. And I think some of the like general feedback and reviews on Revenge of the Sluts has been that, where it's people who are like, wow, like I knew it happened, but I didn't realize it was like this. You know what I mean? Like it was people who were
that's
like,
really interesting.
Yeah, like I grew up in the age of like, you know, flip phones. We didn't have cameras on ours when I was in high school. So this idea of being able to like send photos to somebody is like this totally different realm for them. So it's almost like, you know, I view Revenge of the Sluts as being one of those where it can kind of like bridge the gap, where hopefully it's, you know, something where teenagers are like, yeah, okay, like this is like my peers, these are my people, like I can see this happening in my school and I can relate. And then it's something where adults can read it and be like, oh, okay, so this is like what's really kind of happening and some of the stuff we're missing.
Yeah, for sure. And that's so interesting that like you were getting that kind of response. And I just find it interesting that sometimes like older generations don't really realize that like we have so like smartphones today are like more powerful than like military machines like in World Wars. Like that's how powerful they are. And they have access to so much. And so it's like a whole different ball game that we're exposed to. Okay, let's check our next question. Okay, it's from Ayana. So she said, you said that some of the inspiration for Rot came from the research you had been doing and a topic that was pretty much ripped from the headlines. So what is another hot topic or current event that has piqued your interest enough to write about next?
Oh, okay. So one thing I'm really intrigued by is, I guess like, I don't know what to call it. I guess like children in Hollywood. I watched a documentary.
Oh.
Yeah, and that kind of idea. I mean, like, I don't know if I'll ever have like enough background to be able to write it. I feel like there's so much stuff that constantly comes out, and it's like every time I hear something, I'm like, oh, that would be really interesting. Like, maybe I should get into that more. But yeah, I think that one in particular just really stands out as kind of a like something we talk about, but not really, like this idea of like how children are treated and that kind of idea when they're working in a primarily adult space, that kind of idea, like protecting them, who's looking out for them. And I think that's kind of a general theme is like, you know, like how can we better protect like teenagers and kind of like what can we do to look out for them and prepare them, but also make sure that adults are doing the necessary work to like help themselves and help other people.
Crystal says, oh my God, please start writing this now. Agreed. I feel like it has like similar themes and like just that whole concept. I just love children in Hollywood. It's also something that like we just let happen and don't really like unpack. Same with like the stuff in Rots. So yeah, I think it would be a really cool one.
Yeah, I think
so,
the ideas that I have, it's like I'll have like, you know, little kind of snippets for things, and it feels like all of the themes are kind of this idea of like, okay, how can we talk about this thing that happens and we kind of all know it happens, but how can we put it into like a fictionalized form where somebody can read it and they can relate to it as a teenager and then also as an adult and kind of learn different things from it and that kind of idea. So hopefully that'll be like the path I continue on. Like,
yeah, and I love that it has such like a wholesome aspect to like your writing, like the fact that you want to do this good in the world, and like, you know, it's not just a fun read, like it's actually gonna make noise and make a change, and I love that about it. So okay, I'm going. Ooh, I love this question. So the title, Rot's Revenge of the Sluts. I said it, even though it's a swear word to some places. It's quite bold and unapologetic. So tell us how that title came to be and maybe some of the challenges you faced. I don't know if you can talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, I came up with it actually. It was like one of the first parts of the book that came out. It was like one of those where it was definitely a spin-off of Revenge of the Nerds, which I've never seen. I'm gonna confess I've never seen it, but I was like really inspired by this idea of like basically being, it's, you know, that idea of being called something and kind of being like, you know, ostracized or made fun of or just kind of like teased in a certain way, and that idea of kind of like fighting back. Like I've never seen it, so I can't say like what the movie's actually about, but like that's what I took from the title, and I was like, that would be really interesting if we did it from like a like female perspective. Like what if we did it from the idea of like, we're really tired of you guys calling us sluts. Like, you know, this is like, I'm fed up. Let's get going. Let's change kind of the direction we're moving in. So yeah, that was, I think, part of it. And then it was also after a certain point kind of having to figure out like like how to sell that title to people, and kind of figuring out even like what the title meant to me, because I think the title was at first just an idea of like, what if I did that? That's kind of stupid, but like I kind of love it. And then figuring out from there kind of a plot that would match up with it, and if I would actually use the title for the book or not. Yeah, it was just a feeling of like, I mean, it's essentially clickbait. Like it's meant to kind of be one of those where people look at it and they're either like a little bit uncomfortable or kind of like intrigued, or like there's kind of, I think, a variety of reactions that people might have to it. So I think it's definitely kind of like a way of pulling people in and kind of forcing them to talk about or think about something that they might not usually without somebody putting it directly in their face.
Nice. Yeah, and I totally agree. Like it's definitely that inciting title where like you kind of want to make someone uncomfortable, and I think that is part of the point, and reclaiming that word and making it not so shameful. Yeah, I love it. It's a great title. Okay, from Jordan, who asked who's your favorite character to write. I think we touched on this a little bit, but
Yeah, I mean, I think it was basically Sloane anytime she showed up. And I really loved writing the newsroom scenes. Like they were very heavily taken from like the newsrooms that I was in growing up, and kind of that feeling of like having your own space. So that's not so much like a specific character, but it was like basically anytime that like Edith and Ronnie got to interact, or anytime like Colton would show up, that kind of idea. Like it was a very, there's like a certain kind of bond, I think, that comes up when you're forced to be like coworkers almost. Like you almost reach a point where you're like coworkers more than friends in certain ways because of the work dynamic. I think that's so funny when you're like 16 and you're like, we have to basically treat each other like we're coworkers, but also we like eat lunch together and like, you know, go to parties together. Like it's just, I just think it's really
I
fun.
love that. Yeah, it's like this newsroom vibe is its own sort of character like in the book. Yeah, I love that. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so what is the toughest and best part about writing a fictional narrative that leans into real world topics and issues? So the toughest and best part.
Yeah, I think I'll start with the toughest. I think the toughest part of it is wanting to be as true as possible. So wanting to make sure you don't necessarily sacrifice like, you know, validity and kind of relatability for the sake of creating drama, I guess. Like I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I don't think there's like a good or bad way to tell a story. But for me, it was really important to just be really straight up about how real life kind of works and how these situations might play out in just an everyday high school, and that kind of idea. And I think it was really tough just making sure like I captured that properly and there weren't any moments where I was like, you know, writing a character incorrectly or like addressing trauma incorrectly, that kind of idea. So I was really, really careful about how I did it. And I tried to be as honest and as respectful as possible when doing it. And I think the best part is honestly being able to do like tours and stuff, being able to like talk about the book. Like I think there was a lot of fun that went into the book, and it was really kind of like cathartic to actually write it. But I think there's a lot of value. Like it was written to discuss and it was written to talk about. So I get to talk about it with people. It's just like really exciting.
Yeah. No, for sure. I love that. And I think like as I've been seeing like reviews come in and like people talking about it on social media, like it just really excites me, even though it's not even my book. Like I'm just like, yes, people are talking about this. And it's just like a wonderful, wonderful feeling. Okay. Okay, so sorry. So what do you think are the differences and similarities between how women silence women and how men silence women?
I think I'm like trying to come up with like an on-the-fly answer for it. I think we're taught different things. Like I almost think there's like a gendered response in that way. Like we're taught to respond in different ways. Like for men, I think it's kind of natural for them to just speak over or to immediately justify and to kind of be like, well, this isn't true because, and to like kind of silence in that way. And then I think for women, it's more of this kind of undercut, like, I can't remember who the like theorist is. I'm not going to get too like into it, but I think there's a theory that's like something about the different ways that teenagers will like respond to each other. And it's like teen girls typically choose like icing out. Like that's like a proven consistently time and time again. That's the way that they like embarrass the women in their lives, or, you know, kind of say like, you're not one of us, that kind of idea. Like that's actually been shown as like a social concept.
That's super interesting.
So I think there's kind of a like, I guess like a gender aspect to it, kind of like how we're socialized, that kind of thing really shows in the ways that we talk about just like, I guess like victims in general, sexual violence in general, that kind of idea.
Yeah. Wow. One good answer. I know you're bringing it up on the fly, and I feel like I'm like throwing things at you, but yeah, I love that.
This is defense again. I'm like, let's go. Like,
yeah, bring it on. But you're doing amazing. But those are actually all the questions that we have. And you have been amazing. So I want to see, like, is there anything else that you want to say about the book, or just about writing it, or what you want people to take away from this?
I mean, I guess I'm just excited people are reading it. Like, it's kind of this like still really surreal feeling of like, oh,
Yeah.
people actually want to like buy it and read it. It's just exciting.
It's super exciting, and I'm so glad that some people are picking it up and reading it and talking about this.
It's definitely gotten a very good reception in our household. So thank you for writing such a good book, but also such a good book that talks about something so important and that can open up the doors for conversation. Because I think, like you said, conversation is such an important and amazing thing that it's just really important. Sometimes you just need to talk about things. But I don't know if there's any projects or anything you can share with us, but if both of you could let everyone know where they can keep up to date with you, social media or newsletter, whatever you'd like to share, any of that information.
Go ahead, Natalie.
You can here, I'll type it into I'm on Instagram and on Twitter at Natalie X Walton. So you can find me there, and I'll have just like general kind of like updates and things. Yeah, I mean, I think it'll just be kind of my day-to-day.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I just popped my handle in there as well for Instagram.
Awesome. So make sure you go and follow and that you go and buy Revenge of the Sluts, which I love that you even talked about the title, because there's something almost that feels taboo about saying the title of the book, but there's like a power in that in and of itself and kind of like the reclaiming. So everyone go and buy Revenge of the Sluts, and thank you so very, very much for joining us this evening. We will see you all at the next event. Have a great one. Bye.
Thanks for coming.